Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series on the children's care placement market. My name is David Fairhurst, Executive Chair at Mutual Ventures, and I'll be your host today. Mutual Ventures was appointed by the Department for Education earlier this year as the delivery partner for the regional care cooperative Pathfinders in Greater Manchester and the South East, and to deliver a programme of research for children's care placements. I'll say a little bit more about the RCC Pathfinders later, as I'm sure many of you will be interested in that. Today, though, we are focusing on our research into commissioning, forecasting and market shaping in relation to children's care placements. A quick word on why this work was commissioned. You'll know the independent review of children's social care in 2022 and the Competition and Markets Authority market study in 2022 identified significant issues in the market for looked after children's placements. These reviews found that current methods for providing and commissioning placements are not effective. Many local authorities lack the buying and negotiating power to shape the market or invest in their own provision, and this has resulted in a shortage of suitable placements, leading to decisions based on availability rather than the best match for the child, which in turn results in poor care experiences. In response, the previous administration's Stable Homes Built on Love report outlined that the Department for Education would commission an independent organisation to provide national support on forecasting, commissioning and market shaping. And the current government's Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive policy reaffirms this commitment. The work involves two phases. The first phase was evidence gathering, where we spoke with 46 local authorities across England and a sample of provider organisations, representative bodies, the regulator and various sector experts. This phase has recently concluded and the detailed report from that will be available by the end of this month. The second phase, which begins with this webinar series, shares learning from the research, and we'll be delivering 4 webinars and various information packs that you'll all be able to access. In this first webinar, we'll provide an introduction to the research and share the headline findings. The 3 webinars that then will follow will go into more specific detail on various chapters of the report, with each one taking place from January, February and March. These webinars are primarily aimed at colleagues in local authorities, central government, voluntary and community sector, and providers of children's care services. To help take us through the findings and dig into some of the specific areas from the report, I'm joined today by our panel, which includes Ross Murray, a colleague at Mutual Ventures and the project manager for the research and national support, Tom Rintoul, director at Social Finance, who's worked with Mutual Ventures on this research and authored the data and forecasting chapter, Andrew Rome, director of Revolution Consulting, who has worked extensively in this field and provided advice to local authorities, providers, regional groups and the Department for Education, and Martin Quinn, a commissioning and training consultant with an extensive background in local authorities' children's teams. I'm also joined by Anya Campbell, also a colleague at Mutual Ventures, who works on our team supporting the DfE's Fostering Recruitment and Retention Programme. The structure of the webinar will be as follows. So Ross will provide an overview of the evidence gathering methodology and high-level findings from the report. Tom will speak about the data chapter, focusing on the benefits of a common data model. Andrew and Martin will talk about relational commissioning and improving relations with providers. And finally, Anya will talk about fostering recruitment and retention. We'll take some questions throughout, and please use the Zoom Q&A function to post those questions. And we'll also have a panel with all our experts towards the end of the webinar. We'll finish promptly at 12 o'clock, if not before. But thank you for joining us today. Really good to see you all here, and let's get started. Our first speaker is Ross Murray to take us through the approach and key headlines in the report. Ross, over to you.
Thanks very much, David. Good morning. I'm Ross, a consultant at Mutual Ventures and the National Support Projects Manager. I've been coordinating the field work as part of the evidence gathering phase for national support and was one of the authors of the report. Before we dive into 3 areas from the project report in more detail, I'm going to provide an overview of the project methodology for the evidence gathering phase and briefly discuss the report structure and key themes. In terms of our approach, the Department for Education funded research started in April and aimed to understand current practices and tools for forecasting, commissioning and market shaping, and identify the key challenges and potential solutions. The evidence gathering phase of this project started off with a desk-based review to synthesize existing literature on current practice in our three main research areas, and this provided the key lines of inquiry for the fieldwork. We then had scoping calls with 46 local authorities from across England, which were selected based on a range of different metrics, such as location, council type, Ofsted rating, and the number of looked after children. Based on these calls, we held a series of follow-up interviews, zooming into different aspects of practice. We also had conversations with provider organisations of foster care, residential care, and both, as well as trade associations, such as the National Association of Fostering Providers and Children's Home Association. And finally, as part of the fieldwork, we spoke with a range of key stakeholder groups in the sector, such as Ofsted and the ADCS. The evidence gathering phase culminated into a detailed report, which we published on the Mutual Ventures website before the new year. The findings from the evidence gathering phase has helped set up the next phase of this project, which is evidence sharing, and has informed our learning programme. This includes this webinar and will also include a range of blogs and information packs through our website, all of which will be focused on improving practice. Next, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking through the structure of the report. The report has 6 chapters. The first introduces this work and is followed by the challenges and context. The remainder of the report outlines the approaches, tools, and mechanisms that demonstrate potential for enhancing practice for local authorities and identifies opportunities to further advance these efforts. These are focused on improving forecasting and the use of data, market shaping, commissioning arrangements, and increasing access to fostering and residential placements. Starting off with the second chapter then, challenges and context. This chapter is most consistent with other key literature in this space, such as the challenge outlined in the Competition and Market Authority Review into Children's Social Care and the Independent Review of Children's Social Care. Generally, the challenges that we heard were unsurprisingly very consistent with the existing literature. The most commonly reported challenge was the lack of sufficiency in both fostering and residential care. The scarcity of suitable placements is a significant issue, particularly for older children and children with complex behaviour or specialised needs. It was interesting to note that a number of local authorities reported that they were aware of ways to increase residential provision, including investing in in-house homes, although their ability to do so is limited by financial constraints. Whereas in fostering, there was a similar concern about the lack of placements, but local authorities expressed that although they have invested in new initiatives to recruit and retain foster carers, challenges continue to persist. One head of commissioning captured this challenge when they said, "Residential care is challenging and a major budget issue, but I can see a way through. It is actually fostering that keeps me awake at night because we don't know how to solve it." There are a number of other challenges that were mentioned, including the increasing complexity and diversity of needs for children in care. And perhaps most importantly, we heard that children are experiencing a number of negative outcomes. These include being placed in settings that are not appropriate, including unregistered placements, being separated from their siblings, and not having access to the care, therapy, or facilities that they need. Imagine a 14-year-old already navigating the complex emotions of being in the care system. Now imagine that child being moved hundreds of miles from their community, placed in an inappropriate setting that doesn't understand their unique needs, or worse, unable to find a suitable placement at all. This isn't, unfortunately, a rare scenario. This is a scenario that the stakeholders who participated in our research recognised and is an everyday reality for hundreds of children across England. The remainder of the report therefore focuses on specific aspects of practice related to forecasting, commissioning, and market shaping, with an aim of helping reduce the chance of this scenario happening for children in care. This takes me on to the third chapter, which looks at the use of data and forecasting. The research identified 8 distinct areas in which local authorities mentioned needing forecasting and data analytics to support their work. I won't cover all of these now, but some of them included analytics for sufficiency planning, so understanding what services are required and where, financial forecasting, predicting placement spend and managing budgets effectively, as well as negotiating prices, understanding what are reasonable prices for different services and what others are paying for similar services. Through our research, we discovered a lot of untapped potential. Local authority decision makers were able to clearly state what analysis they needed and why it is important. However, the path to getting there was less clear. The key challenge for local authorities was not a lack of the skills or tools, as most of the analytical needs could be met through Excel. Instead, the main challenge was the data and activity that comes before the analysis, particularly capturing the right data from the outset, robust processes for ensuring that data is comprehensive, reliable, and up to date, and the infrastructure and governance to share data with other authorities. There is significant work available within the sector to build upon and a general willingness to share, and Tom will provide more information on one of the opportunities that was highlighted in this report, which is around common data models. The fourth chapter is on market shaping. From our interviews, it was clear that authorities are doing this to different extents. Some have had historically negative relationships with providers, which has resulted in some providers stopping working with them, whereas others have strong relationships and even had providers coming to them to address local authority challenges. This chapter deep dives into two themes. The first is market engagement and information sharing with providers. We found that effective market shaping is crucial for local authorities to shape a responsive and sustainable care market. This includes the need for local authorities to have an understanding of local supply and demand through accurate data, the need to develop a data-informed market engagement strategy and share it with providers, as well as the need for engagement events on an ongoing and regular basis, including a mix of group and one-to-one engagements. The second theme that we explored is improving relationships with providers and relational commissioning. This looks at the different ways that local authorities are developing long-term and trust-based relationships to help create a stable local market. I won't go into too much detail on this, as Martin and Andrew will be discussing this shortly. The fifth chapter is commissioning arrangements, and starts off by considering different views from across the sector on effective commissioning. The chapter then moves into three different aspects and approaches to local authority commissioning of children's care placements. These are joint commissioning, with a particular focus on joint commissioning with health. We explore some of the promising examples of joint commissioning that we encountered in the sector, such as children's homes being jointly funded and demand-side response mechanisms to get placement funded from ICBs for children with complex needs. We also explore learning from adjacent sectors, particularly around adult social care. We then look at frameworks and block contracts. This research has found that the current reliance on spot purchasing is a major challenge driven by multiple factors. And we heard that frameworks and dynamic purchasing systems were preferred, although these have reduced in effectiveness as demand and supply imbalances have developed. We also heard that block contracting can be an effective component of the placement sufficiency strategy. A number of examples of block contracts were highlighted, and although many were only used for a small number of placement purchases, we've been able to consider a number of principles that support their development, including strong and ongoing relationships, agreed placement matching processes, and flexible arrangements. The last theme of the commissioning chapter is regional commissioning. The majority of local authorities involved in the research are part of some form of regional group or arrangement. However, a number of challenges were mentioned which are limiting practice. We therefore consider some of the principles for effective regional arrangements, which included cost-sharing mechanisms, consistent engagement across consortium members, and pooled budgets. The final chapter is increasing access to foster and residential care places. This chapter considers how local authorities are establishing new residential provision, which many local authorities are currently investing in or considering doing so, and this appears to be an area that most are intent on developing further. Local authorities are building new homes and repurposing existing council properties. We explore some of these different options in detail, including enabling factors and potential challenges. We also explore ways to encourage providers to open or expand their residential provision, as despite challenges engaging in shaping the private market, many local authorities recognise the need to encourage providers to develop new provision. Most commonly, this included working with planning departments to provide support and advice for providers, as well as innovative approaches to influence planning decisions, such as developing planning clauses to prioritise local children in new residential provision. There is also a section on strategic partnerships with providers, as we have heard that some local authorities are forming strategic partnerships with private and voluntary community sector organisations to address capacity challenges and improve service quality. These include preferential placement agreements, leasing homes to providers, and joint ventures. The final theme of this chapter on increasing access to foster and residential care placements looks specifically at foster care recruitment and retention. My colleague Anya, who is involved in the Fostering Recruitment and Retention Programme, will be sharing more information on this as part of this webinar. So that provides a whistle-stop tour of the report structure, which is about 100-page document in total, so there's a lot of content to get through. But this webinar marks the start of our learning programme, and between now and March, we'll be sharing the full research report through the Mutual Ventures website, hosting a webinar on a monthly basis, and sharing blogs and information packs with you. We'd like to continue the dialogue and continue the learning that we've started to go on as part of this project. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much, Ross. We're going to turn next to Tom Rintoul, who will talk us through some of the findings we've made on data and forecasting and the common data models. So, Tom, over to you, please.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, David. Hi, so I'm Tom Rintoul, as David said. I work for Social Finance. It's a not-for-profit that people probably know better for its work around social investment, but actually my team have been around for about 10 years. We're now about 25 data scientists, software engineers, designers, and for the last 5 years in particular, we've been working on how to create the analysis that sort of commissioners and their colleagues need in order to manage this market. So very grateful to Mutual Ventures and to the DFE for bringing us in to be a part of this program to look at analytics and at forecasting specifically. For anybody who doesn't make it quite to the end, I think sort of this is it in a nutshell. So if we're starting with sufficiency analysis, and there's a bunch of other analytical topics that are covered in the main report, and the question you're really asking is, well, okay, what is the additional provision, where, and available at what notice that would actually have addressed sort of the problems we've had, whether that's about people being placed too far from home or in accommodation that you didn't think was suitable. How do we get the analysis that we need? And for those who aren't getting it at the moment, the gap has typically been people are saying either what they're getting isn't really telling them anything that they didn't know already about the gaps in their provision, or more commonly, it's just not giving them the evidence that they need for a business case. And essentially, there are local authorities who've solved this. Where they have, I think what they're finding is that the problem is not the skills of analysts. It's not the tools that they're using. These are jobs that can be done perfectly well with Excel. It's everything that comes before the analyst, as Ross said earlier. It's about what data we collect in the first place and about how we manage it afterwards so that an analyst has something good to work with. Which is good and bad news. I suppose sort of the good news is we don't need, in order certainly to address these problems, we don't necessarily need to invest in expensive software. The bad news is that things we do have to do, whilst simple, are quite difficult. You know, it's about ensuring that we have robust processes at various stages. We're going to talk through that in a moment. But what we've been able to do, partly sort of through this work, is to distill what is working in some LAs into a data model that says, right, if you collect these things in this way and you store it here, you should be able to answer those questions that matter to you with your existing staff. That material is free. It's been designed very specifically for the constraints that local authorities are facing. So really balancing sort of the analytical power on the one hand against the ability to collect it very easily on the other. So we're talking about a couple of minutes per placement rather than sort of days and sort of new assessments to be conducted. And it's designed to be able to be implemented in any software. So you're not committed to buying software here or to sort of only using some additional package other than your CMS. And hopefully it's something that's of use to local authorities as a whole. Ross, if we could jump forwards. Fantastic. So a small bit of context. I suppose it's worth for those who don't spend all of their time thinking about data to consider what are actually what we would call sort of the stack. What are all the different things that need to be in place in order for you to get the analysis that you want? And if you'll indulge me, Ross, if you could jump forward one, I think it's easiest to do that in the first instance by making a quick analogy to something that we're all fairly familiar with, which would be the experience of shopping. So if I were to wander into Tesco's and do my Christmas shopping, obviously the bit that I experience directly, if we're the above the waterline, if we think about our iceberg metaphor, is the shop itself. But in order for me to get anything I want in the shop, before that we need the logistics, before that there needs to be warehousing, and before that needs to be purchasing. And the important thing is here, there's that even though the shop is the thing that I'm experiencing, any failure anywhere in that chain below is going to prevent me from experiencing what I want in the shop. And even though I will experience failure in the shop, the source of it is further down. If we're to leap back and skipping on a slide, Ross, to forwards, that's it. fantastic, yeah, to the world of sorting out our data. Above the waterline, really in this case, is the analysis. This is what we see. This is the charts, any content that we have for navigating between them. The layers below those are where the improvements are to be made in most places. So if we, at the very foot of that is a question of what we capture in the first place. Beyond that, it's then the processes that we have daily, weekly, monthly for making sure that the data in those is correct. It's then final step before the analysis, it's actually making sure that that data is available somewhere, that the data, if it's come from different sources, is linked and that it's accessible to whoever's doing the analysis. And I think that the single most important thing that we noted, the most consistent thing across the majority of LAs who weren't getting the analysis that they wanted, was that their problems were below the waterline. And in particular, in almost every case, they started right at the bottom in what gets captured. And that's why we're here sharing this as sort of a common data model to address that problem. Ross, if we could step forward one. So if we're to make this work, then it's not enormously complicated. As I said, we're talking like, yes, it is hard to put in place, but that's not because it's complex. It's just because it requires a lot of effort. So in the first instance, this is about making sure that the right lists exist. And if you map to what we found was in the vast majority of local authorities, actually they're keeping a very, very similar set of lists within the commissioning team. So almost every authority is maintaining a list of referrals. Typically for operational purposes, this is, who are we currently searching for a placement for. Almost every authority, some authorities distinct from that are maintaining a list of ongoing searches. That's something we can set aside here. And pretty much everybody is maintaining a list of placements that we have made. So long as the referrals list and the placement lists are in place, that's fine. We don't need to do anything particularly novel. More difficult is then making sure that the right fields exist in each one, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Likewise about quality control and about feedback loops. So Ross, if you could step forward, we'll look now at the material to collect. What we found in the first place is that most of the time, as you'll be familiar with, in most local authorities, finance information is being kept in one place. The performance team have a second set that's mainly about statutory reporting, and then the commissioning team themselves, as well as the in-house teams, are holding the data that's used for sort of operational decision-making day to day. What's the list of places that I'm searching for at the moment? Who is responsible for which? What's their status? Have they been governed? What we've found as a solution that works fairly well, that is easy to implement, is actually to build on those operational lists rather than trying to fix what's in the performance team with the finance team. And with small changes to these lists that the operational team are holding, we're able to actually answer all of the questions that we need. And so we focus on two of those lists, as I said, the list that they're capturing at referral and the list that they're capturing at placement. At referral, the first important change is to capture unique IDs. That's not operation. A lot of teams operationally aren't doing that. They will write TR or Tom R rather than sort of an ID. But capturing the child ID specifically allows us then in subsequent steps to link back to the rest of the data in our case management systems. And that allows us to actually do a lot of the analysis that we need without overloading the placement team with having to recapture data that's already held elsewhere. The second important change was just changing the way that we capture locations of importance. And I can expand on that in the Q&A if people want, but there's also sort of templates that I can share. The third was capturing the social worker's view on the suitability of different placement types. This wasn't being consistently done anywhere that we looked, but winds up being key to some of the questions that people are asking. So one of the most common things that is brought up by commissioners when they talk about the analysis that they have is that it doesn't actually tell, is that they will often say, the data that we have doesn't really tell us what the demand is for children's homes in particular, because it's only listing what placements were made, not necessarily what was sought, and the majority are telling us that 25-30% of the placements that they make in children's homes, they were originally seeking a foster care placement, and they say that we know, from our sort of direct experience of arranging these places, that actually that this is displaced demand for foster care being represented as if it were demand for residential care. You can't use that for sufficiency analysis. The flip side of that, and that is a real problem, the flip side of that problem is it flushes up a real opportunity, which is say if we can start to distinguish, to identify that displaced demand, then that is great material for making a business case where we want to invest, whether that's in in-house provision or strategic partnerships or some other initiative. So here, the change that we've experimented with is actually specifically capturing, before the placement is made, what social workers are recommending as to whether a foster placement is sort of unsuitable, suitable, preferred, and a children's home is suitable, unsuitable, or preferred. That allows us with a very, very small additional piece of data capture to distinguish immediately between sort of what we might call sort of real demand and displaced demand. Importantly, we also start capturing the operational context that's not present in most people's lists at the moment. Some of that is fairly banal. The important part is the date the placement is required by, because one of the things, again, that we find commissioners talk to us about is particularly where they move between authorities, is I suppose sort of the well-known phenomenon of if referrals are being made very close to the point at which placement is required, a team obviously have very little time to find a placement. That's sort of typically implicated in sort of a large number of the less suitable placements teams find. They then lack the data to show that. And so given that a lot of local authorities are moving towards some kind of regional benchmarking, collecting that particular piece of data, if you're working on this as a region as a whole, very quickly gives the people responsible for commissioning and for sort of the social work services leading up to it the ability to see, well, okay, are we systematically giving our brokerage teams less time than some of our peers are in order to find these placements, and are there particular types of situation doing that most commonly, and that helps them to drive their improvement practice. There's then a set that we collect around the point of placement. So what do we actually need in this placement? That's where a lot of the detail is. I can imagine if there's questions, that's where we're going to focus. But that's sort of really where a lot of the work has gone in, particularly around research with providers to understand how we translate between a child's needs, as a social worker might commonly describe them, and translate that into, well, what is it that we need from our provision, which is a different question and is the one that's pertinent to sufficiency. We talk about and come back to that, and about the risks to be managed as well, because that actually from providers in particular was an important part for them. The important thing here is the framing. In each case, if we're to go back to that question that commissioners are asking in the first place, right? What is the additional provision that I'm missing? Where should it be available at what notice? What is the provision? And the conversation we had with the vast majority of the 46 that we spoke to was about this sort of inability to compare apples with apples, whether we're talking about pricing, whether we're talking about benchmarking, and sort of the desire to come up with a standard way of describing needs. But what we found is that when we try to connect that to the questions of sufficiency, it's not actually so useful to describe children's needs in a child-centered way. Actually, even though that's where we'd normally start, in this specific case, we actually need to start with the lens that provider brings to bear, because our question really is to the providers. It's saying, all other things being equal, what are the requirements? What is it about a child's needs or the risks that you're being asked to manage that determine whether you offer an available place and at what price? And so, we can sort of touch on this in the Q&A, and people are sort of very welcome to explore the sort of the documentation of this. But that's the perspective that's been brought to bear. Again, sort of identifying the placement and the provider. Importantly, I think we might maybe to talk a little bit around that implementation. What we found in testing this with some existing local authorities was that even though intuitively these might have been things to capture at the point of referral, it actually worked far better to capture them at the point of placement. And that was for two reasons. The first was that if we start talking about needs and risks very quickly, brokerage teams worry that actually they're sort of getting pulled into the space where this is actually a sort of a judgment question for social workers and not something that they should be taking a part in themselves. If we wait until the point of placement to record these, then it's far easier to frame this to brokerage teams as this is recording the needs and the risks that were raised by the social worker and raised in discussions with providers. And it removes some of the stress around whether or not it's appropriate for them to record these things. It also actually adds to the conversation those risks and needs that were brought up in discussions with providers, which is actually a really important source of intelligence here and would potentially be missed if we only relied on what a social worker had stated at the point of placement. We then find it very important to capture the unique identifiers of the placement and of the provider. So again, that's something that sort of operationally is not always strictly necessary, but if we want to be able to use this for analysis, and if we want to be able to connect this to other data without asking brokerage teams to double enter, then those are important things to put in. Cost, very obviously, that's the thing that's missing from many people's data. It's sort of stored in finance systems. Here, this has been one of the real trade-offs. Obviously, there is a distinction between sort of planned cost and actual cost, and there's an important question about the granularity we might go into with respect to costs. But in all of these, what we've found is that the real challenge is implementation, and implementation in an environment where brokerage teams themselves have very little time, and where actually many local authorities don't have enormous resources available to support an implementation. And so what we have found has worked better in testing is to actually restrict the detail that we're capturing around cost to literally just being the total cost, forgoing the opportunity to sort of get into separating out, for instance, sort of transport and sort of therapeutic services, and forgoing the sort of ability to sort of compare planned versus actual cost, that although we do have some scripts that can help with that subsequently. And finally, around expected duration, because again, if we sort of go back to the experience of commissioners who know this from their sort of their daily work doing it, one of the things that's often come up as here are ways that we think the service could be improved that we can't see in the analysis, is really that sort of question of drift, where quite often there is a known and a discussed expected duration of a given placement. And being able to capture that in the moment of making the placement allows us to then compare later whether or not it continued. So it's a whistle-stop tour of the major sort of the major points of what's captured. And obviously, I think my contact details are here, and and I can also be contacted through Ross at Mutual Ventures. But there's material that we've already published on the providing Excel templates, an entity relationship diagram, which is what you can see down in the bottom right for anybody who's configuring a case management system or a brokerage system, and some example forms that include the content that that you might sort of place around something to make it intelligible. Ross.
Thanks, Tom. We've got a couple of questions that we'll take at this point, if that's okay. So we've got one question here. Is there a suggested list of needs and risks? Did you find some commonality?
Yes, absolutely there are. Yeah, there are, and as I mentioned, if anybody gets in touch either directly or through Mutual Ventures, I can sort of share the links to those. They were developed primarily with a group of providers, I think, which is one of the things that's distinctive here, asking them that question I mentioned earlier, what, all other things being equal, what are the needs and sort of the risks as you understand them, and as they would determine for you whether or not you offer a place and at what price. And those are articulated online, and yeah, all of that is free, open source for anybody to use. That was publicly funded work.
Thank you. Secondly, what are the different formats that data is currently collected across LAs for forecasting commissioning?
Yeah, so very briefly, I think in most places we spoke to, some information is in case management systems, some information is in finance systems, most commonly something like Control, Compensate Finance, connected to the case management system, occasionally in a sort of a big ERP, something like Oracle. One or two people using brokerage systems, things like CarePlace, but the vast majority of it is in Excel. And I think the important distinction was that generally sort of the case management systems were being used by performance teams for statutory reporting, for some sort of internal benchmarking work. Finance information was being used by finance teams for sort of, for various things that were sort of analyses led by finance. But most of the information that we need to answer these sufficiency questions was actually sitting with commissioning teams and was being maintained in systems and spreadsheets. And I see that as a strength, not a weakness here, because that means that the same person who has the questions and knows what's worth asking also has a very direct control over what is getting captured and how it's being organized. And that's what I think gives us the potential to improve this quite quickly.
One final one for now, I think. Which team do you suggest is best to compile and use this data?
Commissioning. In an ideal world, there's obviously sort of economies of scale in sort of working with performance teams and working with finance teams, But if you're starting from a fairly low base and you're going to be changing sort of the, evolving what is getting collected in the analysis, what's going to help you get to the right place fastest is having a very, very short distance between the brain that knows what questions are worth answering and whether or not this does it, and the brain that's deciding what are we going to collect today and are we managing that all right. You keep it close. And because all of this can be done in spreadsheets, and because this is done in the referral and placement spreadsheets that most people have already, that's fairly practical as well.
So having said that's the final question, we've had a few more come in. So let's address these now. We've got a bit of time. So is there any more information on provider needs as opposed to child need?
Provider needs in what sense?
I assume data that providers need in order to provide appropriate placements.
Not yes and no. So obviously, sort of, when we started sitting down with a lot of providers and asking them, what is it about, sort of looking after a particular child that is going to determine whether you do this and at what price. They also spoke a lot about the information that they need to decide whether or not they want to sort of accept a placement. There's a very big debate to be had that I think has been had elsewhere, but certainly sort of came up a lot in this work about the comprehensiveness and the reliability and the intelligibility of the material that comes over to them. However, we've tried to stay out of that, mainly because we think that if we want something like this to be implemented at scale, because actually most of the benefits will only really occur to most areas if their neighbours are doing this too, because so many of the questions that people have can only be answered with sort of a regional view. So we're going to need to be able to implement fast, at scale, with the very limited resources that are available to us here. If we start getting into changing the way that this information is communicated to providers, then I think we're actually putting ourselves into what is necessarily a much slower process, because we're potentially affecting the way that decisions are made about children. So what we have suggested to the LAs who are implementing is to say, rather than actually making this a change to your referral form and a change to what providers see, conceptualize this instead as a short, structured summary of what's happened in the referral form, and actually leave the communication between social workers and providers as is, because that is a broader process with its own needs. But I do acknowledge that providers often don't really get the information that they need, and that there's separately a lot of work that could help to improve that.
Thank you very much. We do have a few other questions there. You might want to have a look in the Q&A and respond to those, either as we move forward through the other sections, or if we've got a bit of time, we'll come back to it at the Q&A panel towards the end. Thank you very much, Tom. Much appreciated. And some really interesting findings there. Not much more needed to really develop some good and standardized forecasting insights, I think, across the sector, but just some sharper focus to where the effort is put. I'm going to introduce now, and I'd like them to join me on screen, Martin Quinn and Andrew Rome. So our commissioning experts across our team, and we're really going to sort of have a slightly different approach to this one, so more of a Q&A session. So I'll be your Fiona Bruce question time presenter for this session, and pose a few questions to Andrew and Martin, particularly about relational commissioning and what we mean by that, and how it might take effect. So it's one of the key aspects that we've talked about in the report, and there'll be more detail obviously when that's published. But for now, Andrew and Martin, if we can pick your brains on this for the next 20 minutes or so. So I'd like to start really by posing that obvious question I'll start with Martin, if I may. What do we mean by relational commissioning? What is it?
So commissioning includes understanding local need and determining your ideal of how better to meet it locally. So when you start, you overlap your map of existing services, and your map will be the capacity, the capability, and the location. And then planning with stakeholders as to how to reach your ideal. So from that, we have loads of tools to help us achieve our outcomes, and that's the outcomes for young people we desire, their perspective. We have tools around procurement, engaging with stakeholders, contracting, but all of those happen all of the time, and we need to sort of work on the environment we work on, and that's where relational commissioning comes in. That really helps to shape the environment. And it's about understanding that the contract is not enough to deliver outcomes. The IPC points to the development of a rapport between commissioners and providers. So one of the things that builds rapport is obviously long-term strategic projects and partnerships, 10-year block contracts, sort of something that goes on over a long period of time. But you've also, when you're talking to commissioners and they're talking about relational commissioning in spot purchasing, which the majority of our residential placements now are sort of spot purchased, it requires time, effort, attention, and very much focusing on the local side of things. And so therefore, if you want to sort of, in a sentence, say what relational commissioning is, it's about people talking to and listening to other people and using that information to share and shape their responses. There's some behaviours that underpin it. So the relationship of key individuals, not just senior officers, but the people day to day. So the providers have someone they go to who can sort something out. It's about focusing on recognising and encouraging practice improvement. Actually, having a good understanding and a good rapport also between procurement and commissioning, based on actually what you can do, the art of the possible, to use sort of someone's book from that, but also making the best use of freedoms on that side that are available to us. And it's more focused on the outcomes that you want rather than the actual clauses of the contract. So from that, so that's sort of my view of what relational commissioning is.
Thanks, Martin. Andrew, have you got any further thoughts on that?
Well, I think Martin's kind of said it in what he said, that when the phrase relational commissioning first comes up, I kind of reflect that I hear it on both sides of what is otherwise a commercial relationship. It's interesting, isn't it, that from the research that you've been doing here, a strong message came from local authorities that we need to revisit this topic of relational commissioning. Now, as you know, I've tried to bring to the project sort of insights from other pieces of work over longer periods, and in particular, trying to listen to what providers say. And I particularly recall a survey of providers where, on an unprompted basis, when asked the question, what do you think we need to improve in this sector to make things work better for children? They talked about relationships. That was the #1 topic. And they're talking about human relationships. So those of you who've been around the sector for a long time know that we've been through a period when, because of the growth in external supply services, that we've seen the influence of procurement and procurement rules and processes and systems and IT systems. And it feels as though the human beings on either side of that are saying to us, actually, let's just remember that, we're dealing with a cohort of children and young people. We're dealing with human beings, and it really does bring a requirement, therefore, that we act as human beings, trying to organize things for them together as humans. And I think Martin said that. It's about the human beings meeting and talking to each other and forming a more mutual, respectful relationship in order to kind of put aside other factors and concentrate on how do we best use the scarce resources that we've got to meet all of the needs that are kind of coming at the sector on a daily basis.
In terms of looking back over your years of experience, what has worked well historically in terms of those relationships and relational commissioning?
In some ways, I think some of the answers are fairly straightforward, but they're impacted by lots of things within the wider environment. it's always dangerous in these situations to pick on anecdotes, but some of them are really quite insightful. So situations where a local authority has gone out of its way to realize that it's representing the whole authority when it's talking about its relationship with the market, with providers. It's not just a placement officer searching for a placement. It's not just the commissioner trying to formulate some way that they can legally deal with the marketplace. So the anecdotes that sound really good are where the director of children's services, particularly within an authority, makes a point of engaging with the providers via, a number of routes, but sometimes the simple events where you ask providers to come and attend and hear the perception of what's going on from the local authority. The simple, prospect of a director attending and saying, look, we realize that the way this sector works is we cannot do all of this ourselves as a local authority. You are really valuable partners to us. And for that to come from the most senior level and to be instilled throughout the organization, it's really important. And then the other simple things are just being able to allow that communication to happen on a continuous basis. So having a point of contact that providers can get answers from, that if they've got an issue, they can raise it with that point of contact. And we talk in this sector about stability a great deal for children, don't we? But I think a stable contact and a stable system through which issues can be addressed actually can add a lot of value. So a lot of providers will articulate the challenges at times of, not even having a phone number that they know they can call and speak to someone about an issue. Oh, sorry, there's some noise in the background there. So it's those sort of simple things, such as a consistent message across the authority, consistently carried out across a period of time.
Thank you, Andrew. Martin, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree totally with Andrew in the sense of it's the bigger picture. You're seeing that actually the local authority for its own services that they run can't meet all of their need. So actually it's about seeing that actually providers are part of the solution to them and actually engaging with their expertise and their specialisms. Andrew's right about also the senior commitment, because actually that should run through the organisation. But actually, quite often it's about having the person they contact being able to make solutions. One of the biggest challenges that providers have is if there's a need for, a classic one is that a child needs to go on a school trip and there isn't delegated authority, and it's, quite often you'd have providers saying, the local authority would get back saying, yeah, we've got it authorised. The trip's already come and gone. So it's about actually focusing on the needs of the child, building on personal relationships, which comes with the stability of the officers involved, and actually engaging regularly as well, and being transparent and open, sort of with it. So from that point, yeah, and that comes down, once you do that over a period of time, you build trust. And once you build trust, you can actually be more open, the provider can be more open, you can be more open, and you can actually share where there's difficulties or likely to be difficulties in the future.
A lot of this sounds like basic common sense. I
think so.
It doesn't sound like rocket science, does it? So what's going wrong? What's getting in the way? What are the barriers to this now?
So one of the things is that you quite often will have things like, well, procurement says no. That can be a common one, but also instability of officers, sort of lack of a consistent senior commitment to working with the provider. One of the things I think that's got in the way over the last sort of 10, 15 years is the growth of frameworks, because you're not actually, we haven't been giving providers any commitment. We've been sort of very much saying, we want the ability to buy for you, but actually we're not actually committing anything. And actually one of the things, if you want to build a relationship, you need some sort of commitment from both sides. So ideally you want to have that more formal across the board. But if you are using sort of frameworks or DPVs, it's about, well, actually, what can you commit? What can you offer? How can you help? So one of the things there is about actually local authorities stepping away and seeing procurement almost as a once in every a contract, or something as a once in every 3 years document process, rather than actually an ongoing relationship building and maintaining exercise. So.
Same question to you, Andrew, in terms of what's going wrong at the moment. What are the barriers to better relationships?
I think there are multiple number of factors going on. Just picking a couple out, I think Martin alluded to, I think we've drifted into territory where some people who've come into the sector think that you can control the market through the contracts that you offer and the monitoring of those contracts. And I think what we have increasingly seen is that actually the provider base, particularly in times when it feels as though it has the supply that the local authorities need and want, has become more confident. And they are more confident to say, well, actually, there are aspects of what is being offered in that contract that just aren't attractive. And actually, if I enter into it, create real sustainability issues for me. If I sign up to something which offers no guarantee of a inflationary uplift in prices, for example, for a period of maybe up to 5 years, that's quite a significant risk to take on, given, as Martin said, that I have no guarantee that this continuous stream of referrals will continue in contractual terms. So I think that's that kind of really mechanical stuff that we've, of necessity, put in place. We couldn't continue as we were 20 years ago, where every social worker could just go and make a placement directly with a provider. Clearly, the councils had to get some greater control of that. But I think in using some of the levers, we've kind of pulled them too far to one side, and actually providers have at times just stepped away from that, but they've still received referrals because the demand has been there. And the other thing is, I think it's worth being honest that sometimes there's an inconsistency in the messaging coming from local authorities, not just between authorities, but if a placement officer finds that yesterday in their local newspaper, their local councillors and maybe some senior officers are saying, we hate the high level of profiteering activity going on, we think it's immoral, and we don't want to deal with these people. Imagine yourself looking for placements from exactly the set of providers who now feel, perhaps rightly, quite offended that they've been tarred with the same brush. So I think some of the lack of coherence in thinking about this really completely in the round is not helpful to what's going on. And as Martin said, if we asked the providers right now who are the best commissioners, they would name individual people who've probably been around for quite a long time and who have proven that they will sit in the kind of neutral space and represent both the local authority view and the provider view to the either side of the picture. And that's an incredibly skillful role to pull off, especially if you're in one of those authorities where perhaps your local politicians are saying some really quite unhelpful things while you're trying to make sure that your looked after children are able to access the services that are available.
And it also happens from the provider's perspective, with the growth of larger national outfits, they don't know about the local need in your area or the, sort of side of things. So actually, they'll be sort of putting a solution based on their knowledge, whereas actually you're more aware of the local need and actually what your requirements are there, but you're talking to someone a couple of 100 miles away who doesn't know about your local authority and stuff. So there's those sorts of challenges as well. It's not just one-sided. So from that point,
in terms of overcoming some of the barriers that might exist at the moment to better relationships between providers and commissioners, are there what are the low-hanging fruit? What are the things that either commissioners or providers can start to do to improve the relationship and improve the effectiveness of placements and placement provision?
I think regular contact, actually. It's particularly important with the growth of regional frameworks and regional DPVs. Actually, still as a local authority, you need to be talking to your key suppliers, or the people in your area. Having and they need to be able to access you as well. So and your local authority. So a simple one is sharing contact details. Sort of sharing, who's the best person in your local authority to talk to about X, contract, finance, in commissioning, who's managing that area. So that bit. Actually, trying to have stability of officers around there, and for them to be professional. Sort of, again, they're simple things that everyone can do. And then you're looking at actually some of the longer term stuff is about longer term financial commitments and building trust over a period of time. So that would be my sort of almost start with the small and then build up.
Andrew, anything to add?
I think I'm particularly fascinated in how contracts with a greater commitment can drive some of this kind of relationship activity. And there's a tension in saying that. You can almost hear it in the words themselves. But because if we look back across kind of even relatively recent history, there have been some attempts to do block contracts, strategic partnerships, etc., and we've had mixed results. But what's really interesting about where it has worked to be positive, you can usually detect a period early in this new relationship where a local authority has made some kind of greater guaranteed longer term commitment to the provider or providers that they're dealing with. Early in that relationship, there's often a really difficult period because we've gone skipping off into the meadow together with the contract in hand, but the reality of doing it is always a lot harder. This is a really complex area to operate in, and comes with all sorts of challenges to it. And the relationship can be challenged, but the fact that there is actually a robust longer term contract in place, even with some mechanisms that can help deal with the difficulties in the relationship that might arise, gives you some hope that actually these things can sit alongside each other, and that the contract can actually play a role in facilitating how the relationship builds. And that, again, it's to go to an anecdote. I often hear the example of a block contract arrangement between a local authority and a provider, which is getting off the ground, was going well, but as many people say, it starts to go wrong when a child referred can't actually be taken into the provision that's meant to be covered by that block contract. That can either be something that can lead the whole thing, the wheels to grind together and the whole thing to fall apart, or can actually get into new territory where the provider says, okay, so the block contract provision can't meet that need. We could develop this additional service with your support to get it through the planners, to get it through Ofsted, and with some of your resources, perhaps the local authority, to make this work for this young person. And it wasn't described in the block contract. And what you've got there is just a little glimmer, isn't it, of actually, if we put our best selves together via these relationships and contracts, then maybe we can do a whole lot better than a lot of the spot purchasing activity we see today. So there's an optimistic view.
See, I think maybe it's the social worker in me, but I'm much more about the relationships that can then shape a contract. But the contract is I wouldn't have as a capital C, because I think actually contracts, you look to how they will for certain things that might come up, but you're not always aware of everything. So it's very much more about the relationship and almost a problem solving aspect, which is what you sort of got to towards the end of that, Andrew. But I'd start with the relationship first rather than the contract.
Great, thank you very much. What I wanted to sort of build on, I think, because you've started to touch on this really. Let's end on a positive and constructive note about how things might be improved. So in terms of where relational commissioning works well, or where you've seen success in relational commissioning, what have been the features? So if we can summarize that in a few sentences from each of you.
So shall I go first, Andrew?
Go for it, Martin.
Oh, yeah. So some of them are quite minimal. So some of it is about actually looking at providers and what their needs are. So if you start with someone who's maybe going wanting to set up a new children's home in your area, how do they get in contact with you? Is the first you're going to know about it when you get something from planning or planning consents put through. You want to make it easy so they can actually engage with you early, so that you can actually talk to them and maybe shape their provision. So from that point, so one of the key things there is, it might be saying, well, actually, this location isn't brilliant. Have you thought about something else? Have you thought about somewhere else? So they actually engage early, because if you're able to build that relationship, it might be you're able to then, if it does go through planning and they open as a children's home, you're able to actually have your children are prioritised rather than someone from 200 miles away. Another commissioner offered Regulation 44 visits at cost to new providers who were in the local area. This allowed them to secure the supply, but also impact on the quality of the provision. They were able to actually sort of shape its development as well, and also to reassure providers that they're not in it on their own. So from those, others where you can talk pre-spec about actually sort of saying, these are the outcomes we want, and this is how we think we might go about it. What do you think? Sort of in that. So they might actually say, well, do you know what? If you don't be so controlling on that. Let us have some flexibility on those. So it's those sorts of examples which make an impact and make a difference.
Right. I think we lost you for a moment or two there, Andrew, but pleased to see you back with us.
I dropped out. Apologies.
Final thoughts from you on this, in terms of where relational commissioning works well. What do you see as the key features?
I think we always covered it before, didn't we? That if we can have the human beings talking to each other, and we can facilitate them using let's face it, the scarce resources. There will never be enough resources, but financial resources in particular are particularly scarce right now. How do we best use together, in a kind of balanced, professional way, those scarce resources and solve problems together? There are some examples out there where there are some things that start to happen when there is the right sort of relationship locally. So, the offers of the use of local authority training resources, for example, there's a whole issue around education, isn't there? Access to education for looked after children, particularly if they're placed some way away from the most local area. I think we can only really start to address issues like that if we talk really sensibly together and openly together about what those solutions are. And I do, to try to be positive again, there are some fantastic people on both sides of what is sometimes represented to be quite an acrimonious interface. But I rarely come across people who aren't working extremely hard to try to find solutions for some very complex children that require thinking about it really quite a granular level. And that's what we need to facilitate. We need to have that happening without commissioning, procurement, contracts and finance getting in the way of doing the best we can for the young people.
Thank you, Andrew. They're good words to end that particular section on, I think. Thank you for your contribution and Martin's contribution there. We've had a number of questions and points made through that discussion. Hopefully we'll have a chance to come back to some of those questions towards the end of the session in the Q&A panel. If not, I would just say to our attendees today, we will look to address those points and questions after the event, and that will those responses will go up on the website. So do continue to post questions, even if we don't get to them today. We'll get to them in due course. So thank you, Andrew and Martin. We're going to turn our attention now to fostering recruitment and retention. And we're joined now by my colleague, Andrew Campbell, who is working on the Mutual Ventures support to that programme. Anya, over to you.
Thank you, David, and great to be on this webinar today. As David and Ross both said at the beginning of this webinar, I've been supporting the wider team on the DfE's recruitment and retention programme since the summer last year, and that specifically is looking at supporting local authority regions to set up regional fostering recruitment support hubs. To say up front, I'm not a fostering expert, but I'm excited to reflect on some of our learning from that programme and also share some of the innovations that local authorities and regions are testing as part of the programme. In terms of how I'm going to talk to everybody today, I'll start with some of the challenges which people on this call will know very well in terms of fostering recruitment and retention. And then I'll reflect on what local authorities and regions are trying to do to address these challenges, with a focus on some of the principles and approaches within the DfE fostering recruitment and retention programme. And then lastly, I'll discuss some of the innovations and promising practice in the sector that could be built on for the future. So in terms of challenges then, there are clear challenges in foster care recruitment and retention currently. I'm going to discuss and reflect on a couple of these before looking at the innovations and initiatives. Overall, we know that there's a declining number of foster carers, both because of challenges in recruiting carers and the fact that more mainstream carers are stopping fostering than are approved year on year. And this is leading to a net decrease in fostering capacity. This is compounded by a variety of issues, including an ageing foster care population. So Ofsted data in 2023 showed an ageing population and a falling average length of service, and that's leading to that net decrease in households that I just mentioned. We also know that in some areas, such as London and the South East, there's a lack of appropriate housing or spare bedrooms, which create challenges for people who may want to foster, or limits the type of placements and supports that they can offer. For example, challenges around placing sibling groups and older children. And alongside this, we know that fostering is complex and it's intense, and that can impact prospective foster carers on continuing in their journey to foster. It can impact on the type of support that they need from local authorities. And I think also something we've learned through the fostering recruitment and retention programme and some of the independent DfE evaluation that was done is that there are still often some myths that need to be bust around what a foster carer looks like, who can foster, whether you can have employment and foster, those sorts of things which might be stopping some people from starting their fostering journey. Overall, these challenges are leading to some children being placed in residential placements where a foster care placement would be more appropriate. And we know that this impacts on children and young people who can be placed away from their networks. It impacts on the support and the future of their lives, but also impacts on local authorities in terms of costs they're paying for these placements and the ability to meet the sufficiency need within their local authority. So as I mentioned, there's a wide range of initiatives that are being implemented to try and address some of these challenges. I'll talk specifically about the fostering recruitment and retention programme because that's what I've been involved in, but it's important to say up front that the report that's been produced talks about lots of initiatives across the country, so definitely worth reading once it's on the website. So before I run through the principles of what the fostering recruitment and retention programme is trying to do, I thought it was worth explaining a bit about it. So there's 9 self-selected and geographically linked clusters, and they successfully bid for funding from DfE in October 2023, alongside Foster with North East, which was the pathfinder for the project. And the DfE fostering recruitment and retention programme built on a set of principles. So one of the central principles of the programme is about creating recruitment hubs. And this is a service across a group of local authorities which manages foster carers' journey from initial inquiry through to application. And a key part of the recruitment hub is being a single point of contact for those inquiring about fostering in a region and providing ongoing emotional and practical advice on the approval process from a dedicated recruitment team and experienced foster carers. Another principle of the programme is about the value of working collaboratively as a region to improve the support and consistency offered to prospective foster carers. And this is about providing that consistency and support from the point of inquiry through to approval, including exploring things like standardised data collection, embedding regional approaches to monitor and track inquiries. And this has been really valuable for local authority regions to understand where they might have challenges around timeliness, and identify parts of the recruitment journey that can be improved and iterate this over time. And another principle of the Fostering Recruitment and Retention Programme is the opportunity that the collaboration brings between local authorities to improve and share best practice between those local authorities within a region, but actually also across regions. And the programme has really facilitated sharing of best practice across the country, particularly with leaders across regions coming together, problem solving and identifying solutions. So I've mentioned innovations and different things being tested, so I thought it would be worth running through some of those today. And as I say, these are not everything that people will be doing, but some of the things that we're seeing as part of the Fostering Recruitment and Retention Programme and more widely within local authorities that I think it's really valuable to mention. It's important to say that these are trying to address those recruitment and retention challenges that I talked about up front. So these include things like fostering friendly employers. So this is an initiative supported by the Fostering Network. We know that nearly 40% of foster carers do work alongside their fostering commitments. And this is actually made easier by initiatives like Fostering Friendly. So the principle of Fostering Friendly is to support organisations to understand what foster carers are delivering in terms of the support to children and young people, supporting employers to implement flexible HR practices, recognise that foster carers may need to take leave at short-term notice, and really facilitating an environment where foster carers are able to deliver on their commitments to children and young people and their placements, but also continue to work if that's what they want to do alongside. And even from the Fostering Recruitment and Retention Programme, I know there are regions where they're focused on implementing fostering friendly practices across all public sector organisations. So that will be really exciting to see the impact of that. A key thing that's been done as part of the Fostering Recruitment and Retention Programme has been engaging existing foster carers in recruitment support hubs. And this has been through initiatives like buddy or ambassador schemes. This has established consistency across the region in terms of how experienced foster carers are involved in the recruitment journey. So in one of the regions, they have foster carer ambassadors representing each of the local authorities working to support the recruitment hub. In particular, they go out alongside recruitment staff and conduct initial visits with potential foster carers, and they're able to provide their lived experience and answer questions directly from prospective foster carers that social work colleagues might not necessarily be able to answer. This has been really valuable. Anecdotally, has been something that consistently has been seen as a real positive within that recruitment support hub. And I think there's really important learning for how we bring foster carers to the centre of recruitment and retention. Some of the recruitment support hubs have also explored how we can improve pre-approval training and develop bespoke training offers. Again, across regions, they've been able to both increase the capacity of training offered, but also compare notes about where they could better deliver training or add additional training offers. So in one of our hubs, they've rolled out a training portal for all foster carers to access pre-approval training. And alongside this, they've developed a therapeutic support offer, which addresses the challenges foster carers may face from supporting a child who has had difficult early life experiences and developmental trauma. And the support and the training offered by this hub provides a safe and empathetic space to explore these challenges during assessment. And this actually continues throughout the first 12 months of approval. Also, all the hubs have thought about targeted comms and how they drive inquiries to their recruitment support hubs. So the comms and marketing element is critical to get right. And it's important to say that whilst they're thinking about how they come together across a region and do this regionally, this will also complement existing local authority practice, recognising local authorities know their communities well and know how to target them. So they've been developing regional campaigns to complement that local authority activity, but the benefit that they've had of kind of coming together and looking at their sufficiency challenges as a region is then to think about how they target particular marketing and comms to specific groups of carers or individuals which might be underrepresented in their current foster carers, or specifically target fostering for groups of children and young people and where there might be sufficiency challenges. There's also definitely been a benefit of kind of pooling resources across local authorities and thinking about whether investment can be made into digital marketing in particular, where traditionally local authorities individually might not have large enough budgets to do that individually. Another thing that we've seen across the Fostering Recruitment Hub part of the programme is the benefit of coming together and increasing capacity to deliver regional events. So local authorities are able to kind of come together and identify where they might both be going. You know, two local authorities might be going to the same regional event. Actually, how can they pool resources and increase the frequency and the capacity of events that they attend? Equally, also pooling together money, they are able to attend some events that usually would be too expensive for individual organisations. I also know one of the hubs is exploring how they partner with adoption and other organisations to all attend events and kind of have that coverage across a region. And I spoke a bit earlier about involving experienced foster carers as part of recruitment hub teams. I think, as I said, the buddy and ambassador role is really crucial, but also some of the hubs have actually recruited experienced foster carers as recruitment officers. So they are the first person that prospective carers speak to. They're able to bring that lived experience, but also I think critically challenge recruitment processes, challenge how we might see things, you know, being beneficial to be delivered, and actually iterating processes and driving improvements from their own experience as foster carers. So overall, there's clearly a huge set of initiatives, and I've not even covered lots of other ones, but lots of promising practice in terms of ways that we can improve recruitment and retention of foster carers. And whilst you know, it will take time to see the impact of different initiatives, it's important to say that some of the independent evaluation conducted by DfE into the North East Pathfinder, which is the first kind of recruitment hub, and the comms campaign found initial positive impact in improving processes for applications and comms cutting through noisy environments. And excitingly, the DfE has announced additional funding to make sure all local authorities in England have access to a recruitment hub. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how this work continues to develop and the impact of specific initiatives on fostering recruitment and retention.
Joanna. I just have one question before we move into the broader Q&A. What's next for the FRRP programme?
Yeah, thanks, David. As I said just then, excitingly, DfE are thinking about how they support additional local authorities to join the programme. So they announced an additional 15 million, and that will be looking at bringing local authorities who aren't part of the programme into it. I think also our existing hubs are thinking about what their next year of delivery looks like. So lots of the hubs went live with a kind of minimum viable product, and now they're actually thinking about how they expand their processes, how they develop their training offers, looking at some of that feedback they've got from prospective carers who've moved through the journey and thinking about how they improve the support they offer.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. If you could stay on the line, as it were, and if I could invite our other panelists to rejoin us. We'll just take a few questions through Q&A. Hopefully attendees will see that a number of questions have been answered by the panelists throughout the webinar. So some things have been directly responded to, but I've got a few other questions to pose to you now. So going back to our procurement and commissioning specialists. So actually, we mentioned through our discussion that sometimes procurement rules get in the way of good relationships. How do we stop that? Martin and Andrew.
I think, see, I've worked across a number of authorities, and one of the most difficult one was where the head of procurement sat in the same open plan office as the chief exec, and so everything had to be done very, very structured and stuff. Whereas you had other local authorities where procurement were more as a guide, and it was up to the commissioners to decide. They were guided by procurement. I think we've got obviously a change in the procurement regs coming through. We have and that incorporates more flexibilities. We also have people who've written about, Julian Blake has written about the art of the possible and about actually how we're quite risk averse as local authorities. So it's about trying to be creative and finding that out. But also, I suppose one of the things coming back is, one of my concerns is at the moment, people are very much going into, well, our framework's coming to an end, so let's do a new framework, without actually looking at how we're going to meet need. You know, did the framework work? And if it didn't, then that's probably not the solution. But also thinking right at the beginning, you need far longer than the 9 months a year that you probably have in your work plan prior to the end of that to start thinking. So it's about actually looking at what do we want to do, and then trying to have the conversations of how can we do it? Is it possible? I know that's not a great answer, but yeah.
Thank you, Martin. Got plenty more questions coming through. So I'll move back to Anya now, if I may. We've got another question in from an anonymous attendee. Is any work being done to support IFAs with foster carer recruitment and retention? Some potential foster carers may not want to foster for an LA, but would for an IFA.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think all the regions across the programme reflect that it's important that there is that sufficiency in the independent market where they might not have internal placements that are suitable for children's needs. At the current stage, the programme is focused on recruiting and retaining local authority foster carers, and that's the kind of position from a DFE perspective. So I suppose that's where we are at the moment, but recognising the important part that independent fostering agencies also play.
You. And another one on fostering while we have you. Do you have any lessons learned or reflections from supporting local authorities to set up regional hubs?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could probably speak for hours, but no one wants to stay on for that long. I think there's a real reflection is the value of looking at where you have existing regional relationships to build on. So as I say, the existing hubs are kind of self-selecting. So it was local authorities coming together and deciding what makes sense in terms of a regional collaboration on recruitment. And I think building on those regional relationships, whether that be, you know, your RAA footprints. I know for some of the hubs, they're also now in the RCC programme. But having those strong regional relationships is core for this being a success. And then the other thing I would say is just thinking about who can champion this and drive this forward within regions, both at, you know, a strategic DCS level, but then also at that operational level. And lastly, I'd also just say making sure you're consistently communicating, keeping people up to speed, recognizing this is a change and a different way of doing things. I think it's been a testing time to try and work out how to get those internal comms right and keep people clear on what the programme's trying to achieve and the impact for them.
Yeah. And then I think probably back to Martin on this. So the most successful, this is a comment from Liz Perfect, but she doesn't mind me mentioning her name. The most successful work I undertook with external providers was to co-design a procurement solution for looked after children. I undertook a consultation which followed a you said, we heard, we did service design approach, and this ensured that provider's voice was captured, interpreted, and then presented back to them to confirm their understanding. I just wondered, Martin, if you had reflections or thoughts on that.
I think all three parts of that are essential. One of the things is that quite often people you will do consultation, and what you don't want is providers sort of go into that and say, well, I've turned up, I've been told what they're going to do, and it's wrong. You know, so it really is about structuring in. So you actually sort of, you know, almost yeah, it is. It's you've said this. You know, and clarifying that very early on at the end of your consultation with them, saying this is what we're taking from this. Is that correct? So you can actually find out that, you know, whether what you're listening to is right or not, and then actually going back and saying, okay, is that reasonable? How can we change it? And then putting that into place. It might be actually providers are sort of saying something in the consultation, and you've already got that in your specification. In which case, it's almost as important to say, you know, it's really great you said that, because that reinforces what we are thinking of doing. as well, so that you can actually sort of have that communication, that dialogue.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to start to wrap up now, but I did sort of mention at the start that we're also supporting the RCC Pathfinders with the design and implementation of the regional care cooperatives in Greater Manchester and in the South East. So I know many of you will be interested in those and interested to hear about progress and learning that's coming from those. Again, there was further mention of that in the policy paper recently published by the department. So we will be beginning our learning program for the RCC program in the new year. So there'll be a webinar which will publish further information on again on our website. There's a specific page for regional care cooperatives, and there's a page for the fostering recruitment and retention program for those interested in more information on that. The RCCs are aiming to enhance regional commissioning and improve delivery of care services for children through increased negotiating and buying power, as you know, and shaping the market. So that's going to be pretty crucial. Please, as I say, look on the website and keep going back there for more information. We're going to use that site as a means of communicating the program of webinars. The first one will include contributions from the two leads from the two regional care cooperatives. So lots of insight and information to share on that. So all I'll say on the RCCs at the moment is keep tuned, keep posted. Look at that website for information, tools, and information that we'll be sharing relative and relevant to that. The next webinar in this series, just sharing the information from this research and some of the opportunities for improvement that flow from it. The next one will be on the 15th of January from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. and that will focus specifically on some of the work that Tom's highlighted today, so further and more detailed insight into data, use of data and data forecasting. So please look out for more details and invitations on that, which will flow in the near future. So that's it for today. I'd just like to thank our panelists for their contributions. Very grateful to all of you for that, and very grateful, of course, for all of you who have joined us today and posed your questions. We'll respond to those that we haven't managed to get to in due course. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.